In this episode, we step into a place where many organizations struggle even when they have good intentions, bringing technology risk into the same enterprise-wide risk conversation that leaders already use for finance, operations, legal obligations, and strategy. For brand new learners, it can sound like a simple administrative task, like moving a set of risk notes from one folder into another. In practice, integration can create friction because different groups use different language, measure impact differently, and operate on different timelines, so they end up talking past each other. The goal of integration is not to make technology special or to bury it under bureaucracy, but to ensure technology-related risks are understood, prioritized, and managed alongside other enterprise risks in a consistent way. By the end of this lesson, you should understand why friction happens, what smooth integration actually looks like, and how governance can help the enterprise make better trade-offs without slowing everything down. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A good starting point is to define enterprise risk management, (ERM), as the enterprise's coordinated approach to understanding and managing uncertainty that could affect its objectives. When ERM works well, leaders can compare very different risks using a shared set of concepts, such as impact, likelihood drivers, and exposure, so the enterprise can choose where to invest attention and resources. Technology risk belongs in that conversation because modern objectives almost always depend on information technology, IT, services, data flows, and digital processes, even in organizations that do not think of themselves as technology companies. Friction appears when technology risks are described only in technical terms, because leaders then cannot compare them to other risks in a fair way. Friction also appears when ERM is treated as a compliance formality rather than a decision system, because IT teams experience it as paperwork that adds time without improving choices. Integration without friction means technology risk becomes visible and comparable within ERM, while ERM becomes useful for technology decisions rather than a detached reporting ritual. One reason integration is hard is that IT teams often describe risk in terms of vulnerabilities, threats, and controls, while enterprise leaders often describe risk in terms of business impact, money, reputation, and operational disruption. Both perspectives are valid, but they are incomplete on their own. A vulnerability might matter a lot or very little depending on exposure, business criticality, and compensating controls. A business impact statement might sound dramatic or vague if it is not connected to realistic scenarios and observable indicators. When these views collide, the result can be mistrust, with IT feeling misunderstood and executives feeling like they are being asked to approve spending based on fear. Integration reduces friction by building a translation layer that connects technical drivers to business outcomes without oversimplifying. The point is not to hide technical details, but to express them in a way that supports enterprise comparison and prioritization. A practical way to reduce friction is to align risk taxonomy, meaning the categories and labels used to describe risks across the enterprise. If one group uses one set of categories and another group uses a different set, reporting becomes confusing and comparisons become unfair. An aligned taxonomy allows IT risks to be placed into enterprise categories such as operational disruption, legal exposure, financial loss, and reputation impact, while still allowing IT teams to track more detailed subcategories for technical management. This alignment helps leaders understand that a service outage risk and a supply chain disruption risk may both threaten the same objective, such as timely delivery to customers. It also helps prevent a common mistake where technology risk is treated as purely security risk, ignoring reliability, resilience, and third-party dependency risks that can be just as damaging. When taxonomy is shared, risk conversations move from arguing about labels to discussing trade-offs and actions. Integration without friction also requires aligned impact language, because ERM depends on being able to compare severity across risk types. If IT reports impact as technical severity, leaders may struggle to interpret what that means for the enterprise. If leaders demand that IT quantify everything in dollars immediately, IT may respond with invented precision that undermines trust. A better approach is to agree on impact dimensions that are meaningful across the enterprise, such as customer impact, operational downtime, legal consequence, safety concerns where relevant, and financial exposure ranges. Then IT can map technical scenarios to those dimensions using evidence such as service criticality, user volume, data sensitivity, and recovery capability. This allows risk discussions to be both honest and decision-ready, even when exact numbers are not available. Friction falls when both sides believe the impact language is fair, consistent, and useful for making choices. Another major source of friction is timing, because cycles can be quarterly or annual, while IT risks can change daily. New vulnerabilities emerge, system changes introduce new exposures, and attackers shift tactics quickly, so IT teams often need to make fast adjustments. If integration forces every technology risk decision into slow enterprise review processes, teams will route around to keep operations moving. Integration without friction, therefore, depends on decision rights, meaning clear boundaries for what can be handled at the service or program level and what must be escalated into enterprise governance. Routine risks should be managed within pre-approved thresholds, while significant risks that could materially affect enterprise objectives should be visible at the level. This model supports speed and accountability at the operational level while preserving enterprise oversight for decisions that truly require leadership trade-offs. It also helps remain focused on the risks that matter most rather than becoming overwhelmed by operational detail. Ownership and accountability must also be aligned, because friction often comes from unclear responsibility when risks cross organizational lines. Technology risks frequently involve business process design, third-party relationships, and user behavior, so they cannot be managed by IT alone, even though IT plays a central role. If assigns ownership to business leaders who do not engage with the technical realities, risk treatments may be unrealistic or underfunded. If ownership is pushed entirely onto IT, business leaders may treat risk decisions as technical problems and fail to adjust processes or priorities, which prevents real mitigation. Integration without friction means each risk has a clear owner who can influence outcomes, supported by accountable IT partners who can implement and operate controls effectively. This shared responsibility model becomes practical when roles are explicit, so everyone understands who decides, who executes, and who measures results. When roles are vague, risk governance turns into finger-pointing during incidents, which erodes trust and makes future integration harder. A smooth integration model also depends on consistent risk reporting that is designed to support decisions, not to satisfy curiosity. Leaders typically need a small set of key risk indicators that show trend, direction, and urgency, along with clear statements of what is being done and what trade-offs remain. IT teams often have much more detailed operational metrics, and those details should exist, but they should not flood enterprise dashboards. Friction grows when reports are either too technical to interpret or too shallow to be trusted. A balanced approach provides enterprise-level summaries with enough context to be credible, and it provides drill-down detail for the people who need it to take action. Reporting should also be consistent over time, using stable definitions so leadership can see whether risk exposure is improving or worsening. When reporting quality improves, integration becomes easier because stakeholders stop arguing about the numbers and start discussing actions. Integration without friction also requires that risk treatment options be expressed in a way that fits enterprise investment decision-making. In many organizations, is closely tied to how leaders allocate resources, so risk information must connect to choices about funding, staffing, and prioritization. If IT presents risk treatments only as technical controls, leaders may view them as optional expenses rather than as risk trade-offs that protect enterprise outcomes. A more integrated approach describes treatment options as choices with costs, expected exposure reduction, and operational effects, such as changes to reliability, usability, and delivery speed. This framing makes it easier for leadership to compare risk treatments against other enterprise investments, because they can see the value and the trade-offs. It also reduces the temptation for IT to present worst-case scenarios as a way to secure funding, because the conversation becomes about proportional reduction and measurable outcomes. When risk treatment is framed as enterprise choice, friction becomes collaboration. Third-party and supply chain dependencies are another area where integration can either be smooth or painfully fragmented. Many technology capabilities rely on vendors, cloud providers, and service partners, which means risk exposure is partly outside the enterprise's direct control. If ERM treats third-party risk as a separate program that does not connect to service-level technology risk, the enterprise can miss how vendor weaknesses affect critical outcomes. Integration without friction means third-party risk is connected to the services and processes that depend on those vendors, so leaders can see which dependencies matter most. This requires consistent assessment criteria, clear contracts and expectations, and monitoring that is proportional to criticality. It also requires honest communication about residual risk, because no contract can eliminate all uncertainty. When third-party risk is integrated into ERM with service context, the enterprise avoids the illusion that vendor paperwork equals safety, and it makes more realistic decisions about redundancy and contingency planning. Culture plays a bigger role than most beginners expect, because friction is often emotional rather than purely procedural. If ERM is experienced as punitive, teams will hide issues and minimize risk descriptions to avoid scrutiny, which undermines integration. If IT is experienced as alarmist, leaders may discount warnings until a major event forces attention, which also undermines integration. Integration without friction requires a culture where risk reporting is treated as responsible stewardship, not as personal failure. That culture is supported by consistent language, fair measurement, and leadership behaviors that reward transparency and timely escalation. It is also supported by post-incident learning that focuses on system improvement rather than blame, because blame teaches people to protect themselves instead of protecting the enterprise. When culture supports truth, integration becomes easier because people trust the system and believe that honest reporting leads to constructive action. It also helps to recognize that integration is not a one-time design, but an ongoing alignment process, because the enterprise changes and the technology landscape changes. New products, acquisitions, reorganizations, and regulatory expectations can shift which risks matter most and how they should be governed. Integration without friction, therefore, includes periodic calibration, where stakeholders review whether risk categories still make sense, whether thresholds still match the enterprise's appetite, and whether reporting still supports decisions. Calibration should be practical, not ceremonial, and it should use evidence such as incident patterns, audit findings, service performance trends, and near-miss events. When calibration is regular, the enterprise avoids the drift where ERM becomes outdated while IT risks evolve quickly. This keeps integration relevant, which is a major factor in reducing friction because people resist processes that feel disconnected from reality. A living system earns cooperation by staying useful. A simple example can make the integration idea concrete without getting lost in tools or technical steps. Imagine an enterprise whose customer portal is a critical service for revenue and trust, and that service depends on several internal systems and a few external providers. The IT team sees a growing exposure due to aging components and increasing incident frequency, while the business team sees rising customer complaints and abandoned transactions. If risk governance is isolated, IT might request funding in technical terms and business leaders might treat it as a discretionary upgrade. With integration into ERM, the risk is described as an enterprise exposure that threatens revenue objectives and customer trust, with impact expressed in service disruption and customer experience measures. Treatment options are framed as investment choices with expected risk reduction, timeline effects, and residual exposure, allowing leadership to make an informed trade-off. Over time, performance indicators show whether exposure is declining and that evidence supports continued improvement or rebalancing, which reinforces trust in the integrated model. As we close, integrating IT risk governance into ERM without friction means creating a shared risk language, shared impact framing, and shared decision rights that allow technology risks to be compared and prioritized alongside other enterprise risks. Friction is reduced when taxonomy and definitions are aligned. Reporting is decision-focused and consistent, and ownership matches authority across business and IT stakeholders. Smooth integration also respects timing differences by enabling fast operational decisions within boundaries, while escalating enterprise impact risks for leadership trade-offs. When culture rewards transparency and learning, integration becomes a practical partnership rather than a bureaucratic burden. If you hold on to one guiding idea, let it be that integration succeeds when both sides feel the system helps them make better decisions. Because a risk program that improves decisions earns adoption, and adoption is what turns governance from theory into real enterprise resilience.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.